Years ago, I suddenly realized that I was going to be graduating, and the reality of that situation pressed on me, and I started getting quite nervous. I wouldn't say anxious, but nervous. My room was a mess. I was losing sleep. Sometimes I would just feel my heart racing, like, this is actually happening. It's really coming. In a sense, chaos was ruling my life, or you could say death felt like it was on all sides of me. I want to talk about that, and some patterns I found in art at about the same time that helped me, in a sense, recover from this. Let's get right into it. The first image I want to look at is this icon. So you can see Jesus is on the left, and he's pulling Peter up out of the waters. For those of you who don't know the story, the apostles, you can see them in the boat behind everything, are in a boat in a storm, and it's getting very stormy, and in a sense, death is all around them. Then they see Jesus coming to them, walking on the water. And Peter, it says he wants to be with Christ, goes out there, but then, and Peter's walking on the water too, he starts to get very scared by all the waves all around him. And he starts to sink, and he says, "Lord, save me." Most icons actually have "save me" written above it. And aside, but you can really appreciate how one can learn the story, even if you couldn't read or didn't know the story. In any case, what I want to focus is how Jesus pulls Peter up out of the water. What's interesting is he's grabbing him by the wrist, and let's say he were to grab him by the fingers. That's not a very strong grip. It would slip, or his fingers could break. Grabbing him by the wrist is a firmer grip. There's little chance that he could let go. Interestingly, Peter doesn't hold on to him. It's almost as if he's content drowning. The next, this is a similar icon. This is the descent into Hades. We see Jesus in the center. This is, by the way, after he's been crucified and died. And you see some of the Old Testament characters and John the Baptist behind them too. He's pulling Adam and Eve up out of the graves. Another interesting detail is just how Jesus was walking on the water. That is, he's not touched by the chaos of the world. He's floating above the ground there, and in fact, he's so transcendent that the gates of Hades broke. I want to focus on the detail of him pulling Adam and Eve up out of their graves. Again, we see him grabbing onto the wrist, and Adam and Eve are not entirely receptive to this. It's as if they're content staying in their graves, and I think that's really important. Okay, now let's go to something a little bit more modern. By the way, part of the reason I find this pattern so interesting is I don't think any of the artists, with some exceptions, are aware of each other, and we'll get to why I find that important later. The next is from Lord of the Rings. This is in the movies, not the books. So Frodo has the One Ring, and he's going to go to Mount Doom to destroy it. And to do that, he's going to leave behind his friends. But as he does that, Sam, his gardener, comes out into the water, and he says, "No, I'm going to go with you, Mr. Frodo." But he can't swim, and he starts to drown. What's interesting, Frodo reaches out of the boat and pulls him out of the water. And we get this image. Again, we see that they're surrounded by water, surrounded by death, and they're pulling each other up like this. Later in the movies, in the final movie, Frodo's about to destroy the One Ring. And right before he can, the evil consumes him and he puts it on. At this time, Gollum comes, bites off Frodo's finger, takes the ring for himself, and then, consumed by the evil, falls in, and the ring is destroyed. But as he falls, he pulls Frodo with him. And this time, surrounded by fire, just like maybe in hell, Frodo is hanging on to the edge of the rock. And what do we see? We see that in a nice, poetic, beautiful sort of symmetry, this time his friend Sam is the one who helps him up. And again, we see that he's pulling him by the wrist, the firm grip, you can't let go. And he pulls him up out of death. All right, if you know anything about my tastes, you probably know where the next scene is going. One of my favorite movies, RRR, we see this image. For those of you who don't know the story, our two main characters, Ram and Akhtar, just saved a kid from drowning and burning at the same time because some train cars full of oil crashed, exploded on the water, so the water was on fire, and surrounded by death, they pull each other up like this, out of the water. It's an interesting detail. And then at the climax of the movie, We see that they burn down the Englishman's home with lots of explosives. Again, very loud, very bombastic, so characteristic of Tollywood. And we see them give this handshake surrounded by death and chaos. What does this mean for us? I think this is one of those rare instances where art, which should be a metaphor for life, becomes the perfect way to understand it. I think this is a symbol of friendship love, primarily between us and Jesus. And I found at this time that I felt like Peter. I was the one drowning. I was the one surrounded by death and fire and chaos. And when I reached up, I found help. But more importantly for us, I think it means that, and again, this is why it's so compelling, we know that this is true. We know that when we reach up, we will find a hand to pull us up. I know this to be true. But this pattern also shows that we are called to be the one who pulls our friends out of chaos, whether they want to or not. We have to sacrifice part of ourselves and reach up and help our friends. So, thank you for helping me.